The wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign.
When we
all get to heaven.
All right, so chapter 14, verse 22, as they were eating, they're eating the Passover. It's in the middle of this Passover meal. He took bread. Now, I'm going to just stop there. It says he took bread. It says nothing about unleavened bread. In fact, nowhere in all the descriptions of the Lord's Supper do we find it say unleavened bread. So why don't we use unleavened bread? Because it was in the middle of the Passover. The Passover requirements were that there would be no leaven in the house. You'll recall, leading up to this, he sent two of his disciples into the city and said, go and prepare a place for us. That's part of the process of preparing the place, is to get all leaven out of the house and to get, so this is unleavened bread. It's unleavened fruit of the vine as well. Leaven, the leavening process is actually known as what? Anybody know? What makes bread rise? Fermentation. Leavened bread is fermented bread. So if we understand that unleavened bread means that there's been no fermentation introduced to that, then what should we conclude about unleavened fruit of the vine that was used in this supper? There was no fermentation introduced to that either. It had to be fresh. And so that is what is under consideration here. He took bread. After blessing it, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, take, this is my body. Now, from this passage and a couple other passages that are similar, there is a doctrine that has arisen known as transubstantiation. Big fancy word. What does trans, the prefix trans, mean? To change, like transform. Transform means to change form. Transubstantiation, a change in substance. The doctrine of transubstantiation is the doctrine that the bread becomes the actual body of the Lord, and that the fruit of the vine becomes the actual blood of the Lord. And this is one of the passages, not the only one. Also the passage, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, that's another one that's cited. Take, this is my body. What is that called? A metaphor. If it was to be, this is like my body, then it would be a simile. But that's not what he does. He makes this substance a metaphor. And by the way, did they even understand what it was about at this point? No. But there is something significant going on here. There's a reason why he chose to do this in the midst of the Passover. What was the Passover all about?
Celebration of the dead, the angel of death passing over.
Exactly. Goes all the way back to leaving Egypt. And the 10th plague was death came into the land. And he said, hey, if you want to avoid the firstborn of your house dying, or all the firstborn of your house dying is actually the better way to put that, because it would have been any firstborn, including livestock. But in a case where the husband is a firstborn and the son is a firstborn, you're going to lose both of them. Any firstborn in the family is going to die. But there's a way that you can avoid that. How do you avoid that death? He said, you take a lamb and you slaughter that lamb and you put the blood on the doorposts and on the transom over your door. And this angel is going to just pass over you, pass by you, and not kill you. And then he gave him a meal. After that sacrifice, he said, you need to roast this. And he told him you need to be girded up and ready to go. And you're going to have to leave in a hurry. And so he got this whole thing. And then this is kept perpetually up until this very time. Now, I have to say there was actually a long period of time where they didn't observe the Passover in Israel. And they had lost the scriptures and they had forgotten about doing it. And then the scriptures were found and they were read and someone went, hey, wait a minute, we're supposed to be doing this. Josiah was the king. Josiah orders for it to be, and there's this massive slaughter of animals in an observance of the Passover for the first time in a very long time. But anyway, for the most part, this has been a perpetual activity they've done in to remind themselves of a sacrifice that would deliver them from death. What was fixing to happen on the cross? A sacrifice which would deliver them from death. The blood of that sacrifice ushered in a covenant that would deliver them from death. There is supposed to be a connection between these two events. The Passover was a shadow of the death of Christ. That's what it was. And what we have going on here is him using that circumstance where they are supposed to be remembering those things and saying, hey, this is my body, this is my blood. Now, they don't put two and two together necessarily yet, but what are they going to come to realize later? Oh, wait a minute. Christ is our Passover. That sacrifice. That's what that was really all about. That lamb sacrifice all those years ago wasn't really about deliverance from death. It was about Jesus' sacrifice, which would bring deliverance from death. So anyway, that's why he institutes it at this time. He had given thanks. He took a cup and he had given thanks. He had given it to them. They all drank of it. And he said to them, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. By the way, poured out there is a legitimate term. It also is a figure of speech. His blood was not literally poured out. So why does he say it was poured out? It was intentional. It was poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine. In case you have any questions about what he's talking about, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. So there's also the information that the kingdom is coming. Yes. I have no idea how to answer that question other than to say this. Flesh and blood does not inherit the kingdom. I don't believe that heaven is intended to be a material place. That doesn't mean necessarily that we won't do something. I don't know. We're not told exactly what we're going to be doing to pass the time. Oh, wait a minute. There'll be no time. I don't know. I do know that we'll be praising God. I do know that we'll be singing. There are certain things that are, whether that is accommodative as well, I'm not even sure. I don't know what it's going to be like when we're in the very presence of God. I've never been there. But I think his point is that what he's doing here with this bread and this fruit of the vine in the midst of this Passover supper has a place in the coming kingdom that he was establishing, which we do eat and drink this to this very day. If you got headings, you'll notice in your Bible, it probably says something close to institution of the Lord's Supper. That's what this is talking about. That's what we do every Sunday. We observe this supper in remembrance of his body and his blood, in remembrance of what was done. Just as they observed the Passover regularly, we observe his death regularly. So that's what's going on here. When they had sung a hymn, oh, look at that. They sang too. When they had sung a hymn, by the way, I'm told that that was the customary thing to do at the Passover. At the end of the Passover, there was a collection of the Psalms that would be sung to end that. When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." Where is that written? Anybody know? Turn to Zechariah, the book of Zechariah, right before Malachi. Go to Matthew, take a left, go back 2 doors. That's the directions to Zechariah. Go to chapter 13. The beginning of chapter 13, it says, "On that day there shall be a fountain opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness." There's a fountain free just for you and me. Anybody remember that hymn? This is the same imagery that hymn is drawn from. "On that day, declares the Lord of hosts," he says in verse 2, "I'll cut off the names of the idols from the land, so they shall be remembered no more. I'll remove from the land the prophets and the spirit of uncleanness. If anyone again prophesies, his father and mother who bore him will say to him, 'You shall not live, for you speak lies in the name of the Lord.'" What all is he talking about? Well, if you work down, look at verse 7, this context. Well, let me back up to verse 6. "And if one asks him, 'What are these wounds on your back?' he will say, 'The wounds I received in the house of my friends.' Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me, declares the Lord of hosts. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. I will turn my hand against the little ones. The whole land declares the Lord." That's where it came from. He was quoting Zechariah chapter 13 and verse 7. What that tells us is that everything that Zechariah is talking about in chapter 13 right there that we just kind of scanned over is happening. And what Jesus says, and the way he applies that is, when I am struck down, you guys are going to scatter. I'm the shepherd, you're the sheep. You will all fall away. What's he mean by that, fall away? Their faith is going to dry up, disappear. They're going to backslide. You'll all fall away. For it's written, I'll strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, he's talking there about the resurrection. After I'm raised up, I'll go before you to Galilee. So there's some prophecy going on here. He's telling them what's going to happen. He's actually talking to them about them being restored. You'll recall in one part, we actually have the record of him telling Peter, when you are restored, restore your brethren. after the resurrection, they would come back and have faith in Christ once again. What this is talking about is really, really a simple principle. At this point, they've already been asked, who do you say that I am? And they've gotten that great confession from Peter, right? You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay, they know who he is. At least intellectually they know it. But when he's captured and beaten and hung on the cross and he dies, what does that do to their belief and their hope that they have in him? He's dead. Clearly, he's not the Messiah that we thought he was. He's dead. But then on the third day, what happened? He rose. By the way, you'll recall from other studies that the two women who went to prepare his body, because they were not able to do that because they were rushed, because it was coming up on the Sabbath, they went that Sunday morning to prepare his body, and they found the tomb empty, and they went back to the disciples and said, what? He's not there. He's been risen. No, he's risen. And the disciples said what? Basically, you're nuts. And quit spreading these old wives' tales and rumors. And there's a whole discourse from Jesus where he actually chastises them for not having faith in that. And so for those 3 days, their hope was shattered. That's what he means by you're going to be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I'll go before you to Galilee. Peter said, listen to this, even though they all fall away, I will not. Peter's never one that's shy. And Peter clearly is one of those people, like many of us, who think, well, I'm just a little bit better than the rest of them. Even if they all fall away, not me. To what extent, Peter? Let's listen to him. Jesus said, truly I say to you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. By the way, that's the statement that he remembers after he denies him the 3rd time and the cock crows. That's the statement he remembers that Jesus made to him. And he realizes, wait a minute, I did exactly what he said I was going to do. Listen to verse 31, though. He said emphatically. What does that word mean, emphatically? Okay, that's the root of it is emphasis. And so what it means is that he did what? This was a statement when it's appropriate to put an exclamation point. Okay, exclamation points are way overused in modern times. This is actually a point where you should put an exclamation point. He was being determined and purposeful and demanding and saying in absolute terms, if I must die with you, I will not deny you. Why they didn't put an exclamation point there in my text, I have no idea. But they just stuck a period at the end of it. Do they? Good for them. And they all said the same. Now, this is what's interesting. What's interesting about this to me is this shows what is known in the communication world as the bandwagon effect at work. Okay, what the bandwagon effect is when you see other people doing things, you just kind of jump on board with them. You jump on the bandwagon. It's used in sports where people are not really fans of a particular team until they win and get in the championship game, and now they're fanatics about the team. And they're referred to as bandwagon fans. They're only fans because of what? Because they're winning and everybody else is all excited about them. They weren't excited about them before. They just did it when enough other people showed support. The idea of you just going along. It's how all fads happen. It's how Teddy Ruxpin became a thing. Anybody remember Teddy Ruxpin? I didn't figure it was before you were, but you may have had one when you were a kid. I don't know. I had to figure out how you are related to my younger two sisters. They're a lot younger than me, so one of them had one. Teddy Ruxpin was this creepy teddy bear that was animatronic and that read stories to you, but it was really creepy. But anyway, it was expensive. It was hard to find. People were paying even more for it than it retailed for at the end, and they just went nuts. Same thing with Cabbage Patch dolls. It's the same thing in my book with all sports memorabilia. Baseball cards, prices they spend on those little pieces of cardboard, absolutely insane as far as I'm concerned. But why do they want it? Because everybody else wants it. That's essentially what the bandwagon effect is. Because there is this one person that plows the ground, and then other people go, ooh, I like that too. Ooh, I like that. Then everybody all of a sudden wants to do that or wants to claim that or wants to say that. So Peter says, hey, these other numbskulls around me, they may fall away, but never am I going to fall away. I'll die before I fall away. And then everybody else goes, me too. That's exactly what this is describing. I will not deny you. They all said the same. Hey, I'd die before I deny you. What did they all do before the end of the day? Denied him. And the one who was the most boastful did it 3 times. In increasingly emphatic ways. At the end, he was cursing to disassociate himself with Jesus. And then that rooster crowed, and he went, You know what? That's what he said I would do. He remembered. Anyway, that's what's going on here. Again, in very similar fashion to what we talked about in the introduction this morning, Judas, who was with Jesus all that time, could still become so callous that he would betray him. And he would sit down and eat with him and act like everything was okay. And even after Jesus said, it's one of you, and everybody else is going, is it me? Is it me? Is it? He's completely unmoved by the situation. He doesn't get up and run out of the room in shame. He just sits there. And we go, oh, how terrible. Judas was a terrible guy. You know what this is about? Peter, Andrew, James, John, Matthew, they all denied him before the end of the day. They were there the whole time too. At least Judas wasn't standing around saying, I'll die before I deny you. Maybe we can say Judas was a little bit more honest. I don't know, maybe he was one of they all at this point. It's not real clear because in some of the other synoptic gospels, we do find out that he left before the rest of them. Jesus said, what you do, go do quickly, and he left. So I'm not sure if that happened before or after they all said the same thing. But my point is this, before we get too hard on any one person about their weakness, you know what we need to realize? We all have weaknesses. We all have times, we all have places, we all have days where we do the exact same thing that Peter did. Yes, ma'am.
He talked that way to Satan, and I'm wondering if he was talking directly to Satan inside of him.
No. Because Satan wasn't inside of Judas in the sense of possessing him. He just influenced him. Judas was completely in control and completely responsible for his behavior. And that's why the text says in one place that Judas went to his own place. He bore the responsibility. But we just need to understand that if this can happen to the 12 of them who were with him the whole time, who heard all of his teaching, who saw all of his miracles, who had all the private instruction, Peter, James, and John saw the transfiguration. They had some even deeper instructions that the rest of the people didn't get. By the way, we get all of it. We get to be on the inside like Peter, James, and John were, thanks to the Gospels. In fact, we even get some information they didn't get. But anyway, if they can, in moments of weakness, try to disassociate themselves from Jesus, don't think that it won't happen to you. And again, if I want to avoid that, what do I have to do? Make bold claims? Oh, I'll never do that. No, that's what Peter did. What do I need to do if I want to avoid it? Serious personal work on my own heart every day to make sure that first and foremost, I love the Lord with all of my heart, with all of my soul, with all of my mind, and with all of my might. And a serious level of honesty with self that says, you know what, I ain't there yet. I need to work on this. And constant exercise of self-control and constant evaluation of our behavior, where we stop and say, wait a minute, what's my motives? Why? And we ask questions like, wait a minute, what's the proper way to respond? What would the proper way for Peter to have responded to Jesus? It is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I'll go before you to Galilee. That was offered as the truth behind you will all fall away. So there's the claim. Jesus says to these people, you will all fall away. Peter's response to that is, I will never fall away. What would be the proper response? Here's one to give serious thought to. You remember the father, studied right here in this book, the father who comes and says, well, if you can heal him, he says, if you believe, anything's possible. He says, I believe, help my unbelief. How about this kind of a response? You will all fall away. Lord, help my unbelief. Lord, give me strength. Why would they fall away? Because they would make choices. Lord, give me wisdom to see and strength to persevere and help my unbelief. That's the opposite of what Peter did. Peter responded in rash pride. I will never. What we should respond with is, Lord, I know it's possible, so help me not fall into temptation. Deliver me from temptation. We can learn from these things. All right, I got to stop. Any questions or comments before we move forward? I did not get quite as far today as I'd hoped to, but that's all right. We had a good discussion.
He still believed that things were unclean years down the road. He withdrew at the arms whenever they were gathered together. He withdrew from the saints and went with the Jews. Paul had to call him down.
Yep.
10 years down the road.
Yep. And that's an object lesson in and of itself. These problems don't just vanish. These are work in progress kind of things that I work on continually, and things that I never necessarily completely grow out of. We need to be careful. I want you to understand, I didn't get to go through, the next section goes from verse 32 to about verse 42. It is a situation that is taught from a lot, that's talked about a lot. It usually is pulled out and stands by itself. I believe the purpose of it coming in the flow that it does in this book is because there is an association we're supposed to make between these two things. So as we go forward, and as you study about this Gethsemane prayer, this is the case where he leaves the three behind and he goes off by himself to pray and they fall asleep. Remember to, the whole time you're reading and studying that in preparation for the next class, which I will not be here next week, so I'm not sure who's going to be teaching. Well, I don't think I'm going to be here next week. I don't plan to be here next week. I'll say it like that. I may be here next week. You never know. Anyway, when you're preparing for the class, go back and remember this event, I will never fall away. Especially when you get to the final statement of Jesus, indeed, the flesh is willing, but the spirit is weak. Because I think that these two events need to be looked at together to actually get the main lesson that we're supposed to draw from this. All right, got to stop.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a day
of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory.